Today we're going to talk about the Constitutional Convention. Let's jump right into it. First of all, why was it held? Well, you already know, to revise the Articles of Confederation. They were ineffective, and essentially there were all types of rebellions happening all over the 13 states. For instance, Shays' Rebellion, which happened in Massachusetts, where the government really couldn't control it. Of course, this is going to terrify rich landowners into thinking that we need a stronger and more cohesive government. So when the delegates come together at the Constitutional Convention, which, by the way, was a major secret, let's stop right there. Why did the delegates not want anyone to know about the Constitutional Convention? Why did they want to keep it a secret? Well, if the majority of the country knew that we were actually coming together to reorganize our entire government, I'm sure there would be chaos everywhere. So the delegates decided to keep this convention a secret. Every day when they met, they had to keep the curtains drawn. Now remember, this is the middle of July. They have on these big wigs and these really, really hot clothing. They're in this one little stuffy room, and when they left, they couldn't tell anybody about it. July, no air conditioning, wigs, you can imagine it was crazy. So, at the convention, what were some of the major debates that the Founding Fathers were engaging in? Well, first there was the issue of slavery. Was slavery going to last forever, or were they going to have a cutoff date? What were they going to do with all of the slaves that had come to the new country? Were they going to remain slaves perpetually, or were they going to eventually be able to purchase their own freedom? So, the Founding Fathers thought, that's way too big of an issue to deal with right now. Half of the states, well, actually, almost all of the states had slaves, and they were all building their states, their institutions, their colleges, all of these things off of the backs of slave labor, free slave labor. They said, listen, the Founding Fathers said, listen, this is just way too big of an issue for us to deal with right now. We're going to push it off to the future. We're going to say, in 1808, the slave trade should stop. Until then, the southern states can count their slaves as 3/5 of a person. That's going to make the southern states very happy, because now in their population they can count the slaves who are essentially their property. Who do you think is going to be opposed to the 3/5 clause? Clearly the northern states. Northern states did not have as many slaves, and they thought it was an unfair advantage for the South to be able to count their slaves in their population. A bigger population was going to equal a bigger representation in the House of Representation. Sorry about that. So, that leads us to the question of representation. How should small states and large states be represented in our new government? Now, you remember from the Articles of Confederation that each state had one vote. Some people thought that was unfair. A large state like Virginia having the same vote as a small state like Rhode Island. So, essentially, they come together at the Constitutional Convention. They bring two plans together to form something called the Great Compromise. The Great Compromise established two houses of Congress. The Senate, in which every state gets the same amount of senators. Every state gets 2. And then we had the House of Representatives, in which your representation is based on how big your state is. That goes back to the 3/5 clause. If you were a bigger state and you had a bigger population, that means you had more representatives in the House of Representatives. Now, the smaller states were happy with the Great Compromise because every state got the same amount of senators, 2. That means a state like Rhode Island gets 2 senators and a state like Virginia gets 2 senators. But to balance that out, we have the House of Representatives, where it's based on population. Another huge thing in the Constitutional Convention was, how are we going to make sure not one branch of the government got too powerful? There are 3 branches, remember. The legislative branch, which makes the laws, the executive branch, which enforces the laws, and then we have the judicial branch, which reviews the laws and makes sure that they're constitutional. So, those 3 branches, in and of themselves, are a check and balance to make sure not one branch gains too much power. specifically the executive branch, in which we have our president. So, the way that Congress balances the president is that they make sure that he is not able to just pass whatever law he wants. Congress can override a law that's created by the president. Well, what can the president do to check Congress? He can veto a law that's created by Congress. What can the judiciary branch do? They can essentially declare a law unconstitutional. So, even though we have these three branches of government, no one branch can be more powerful than the other. Ratification. So now that the Constitution was created, and throughout all of these three debates, we're able to come to a compromise and conclusion, ratification has to take place. The document that has been created is the Constitution, and we need to make sure that we have approval from each state. So, the Constitution had to be approved by 9 out of the 13 states in order to go into effect. Now, some of you might be saying, why only 9 out of 13? Well, that equals 2/3. And as you can remember, with the Articles of Confederation, they had to have a unanimous decision. Not everyone agreed with the new Constitution, so they wanted to make it as easy as possible so that they could get this thing on the ground, rolling, and into effect. Okay, now, as the Constitution is being ratified, two major groups emerged. Like I said, not everyone agreed with the Constitution. The first group that emerged was the Federalists. The Federalists believed in a strong central government. They wanted to build more cities, more banks. They believed in industry. They also were strong supporters of the Constitution as it was. They did not want to change it at all. Now, the opposing group was the Anti-Federalists. The Anti-Federalists believed in a weak central government. See how I drew this picture here? What does that remind us of? The Articles of Confederation. The Anti-Federalists believed that we should have stronger state governments, not a strong national government. They believed that we should have an agrarian society, which means a society based on agriculture. They also thought that the Constitution was missing something really crucial for Americans. It was missing the Bill of Rights. It was missing something that would guarantee the personal liberties of all Americans, like the freedom of speech, the freedom to bear arms, the freedom of press, the freedom of religion, all of those things that are guaranteed to us today because the Bill of Rights was eventually added. However, these two groups emerged because they had very two different opinions on the Constitution as it's being ratified. Again, the Federalists like the Constitution. They believe in a strong government. The Anti-Federalists think we should have a weaker government and stronger state governments. They believed in an agricultural society or an agrarian society, and they thought that the Constitution was missing something, the Bill of Rights, something that guarantees our personal or civil liberties as Americans. So, I want to ask you, where does your character stand? Would your character be a supporter of the Constitution, or would your character be an anti-federalist, someone who thought the Constitution was missing this crucial piece, the Bill of Rights? That's all for tonight. Good luck on your homework.